Hi everyone, how are you? I hope you're really well. Welcome to today's webinar, which is talking about communication skills that people managers need, and we're going to share some practical tips in terms of things you can do to help your people managers, or if you are a people manager, things you can do for yourself to support you. Um, and in your role as a people manager. So welcome to the webinar today. So hello, if you don't know me, my name is Penny. I run Penny Jones HR, which is a HR consultancy. We work with HR teams and business owners predominantly to create workplaces that your people want to be part of. And we do this in a few different ways. So we run management development programs and do management coaching. So to develop your people managers to create, again, a workplace that your people want to be in. And we also provide retained HR support to create employment frameworks that people want to work within. So that's a little bit about what we do. So the session today is really looking at the benefits of communication. So we run these webinars every month, and they're free in our member vault. So this might be where you're watching it. So again, thank you for finding us through our member vault. I hope you enjoy these. Please check out lots of the other freebies. As I say, we record a webinar every month. Slow down, I'll get my words out. We record a webinar every month, and they're always stored in our freebies. So if this is the first one that you've watched, please go and check out all our other free resources that we love to share with you. So let's talk about communication skills. So one of the things I have to do every month, I choose to, as part of our strategy to show up and help people, is we write a blog. And this month's blog is around communication skills. And I was talking to my virtual assistant, my VA, about I needed to get on. I needed to wrap up a call because I needed to get on and write my blog. And I said, oh, and the subject's communication skills. And she started laughing and she goes, oh, that's an easy one for you. And actually, I find writing the blogs really difficult. I find putting pen to paper, structuring the paragraphs, getting my grammar right. It's not something I was ever very good at when I was at school. So actually, communication as a subject is only a very small part of it that I'm good at. And that's the talking bit. I like talking. Have a very strong extrovert preference. And so that shows up for me as I like talking, I like interacting, but actually written communication I find really difficult. And so I thought it would be useful to talk about the different ways that communication shows up. So all the different styles of communication, not just presenting, transmitting, and also then just talk about a couple of things you can do just to maybe understand your team a bit better and think about your communication style and where it's working for you and where it isn't. So the first thing that I talk about in the blog is I talk about talking. So some of us are chatters. I love a chat. I mean, I was chatterbox as a kid. And I guess I get a little bit self-conscious about that sometimes and have to catch myself and almost that inner voice is going, maybe it's time to take a breath and let somebody else speak now, Penny. So the good thing about the webinar is I get to do that and it re-energizes me, and hopefully the content of it is helpful. So that extrovert preference, what does that mean? So in this setting, when we're talking about communication, it means that sometimes I like to just transmit. I like to communicate. I like to be the one that's speaking. Obviously, that has a downside to it because that means that I'm not listening, I'm not connecting with others, I'm not hearing other people's points of view. So that talking in itself, I have to catch, I have to keep an eye on. But one of the other things extroverts do is we think out loud a lot. So if you are with extroverts in a meeting, you might find that a meeting runs on or goes off piste quite quickly, loses track of the agenda quite quickly because we're thinking out loud. So, the cogs of our brain are tick, tick, ticking. And as we're hearing our thoughts, we're sort of reacting to them, we're testing them out, we're seeing how others are responding to them. So thinking out loud from an extrovert is something that we do a lot. Versus from an introversion perspective, one of the things an introvert might do is not think out loud. They're much more likely to be listening to their thoughts in their head, so that when they do communicate, they've come to their conclusion, they've gathered their information together, they want to ask a salient question. So an introvert might not communicate as much in terms of volume, but what they will say is when they do speak, it will be important. It will be about, because they'll have formed their ideas already. So they tend to think to speak, whereas extroverts speak to think. So that's the first thing I was thinking about. So when we talk, it can be useful just to sort of almost watch ourselves or reflect on our style that we speak and how we talk and how we communicate. So for instance, do you use few words or do you use a lot of words? Do you use very visual words? So are you trying to paint a picture, for instance? Are you trying to create an understanding? Or are you more likely to communicate using facts or evidence or data versus stories? So which way does your communication go in terms of some of the content of it? Also, how much time do you spend asking questions or sharing information with other people? So what's the purpose of your communication? And really start to think about some of the style that you bring to it. So for instance, do you speak quickly or slowly? Do you speak loudly or quietly? Do you have an accent? You know, can be a real triggering thing for someone. It's really interesting talking about accents. Maybe we'll pick that up on another day, because I'll end up in a rabbit hole if I start down that route. But that can be important. So how clearly do you speak versus, I don't know, maybe confidence is holding you back. So maybe you mumble, maybe you don't talk so loudly. So all of those things can influence how you talk, how you show up from a talking perspective. And then it can be useful when you're observing that style to think about them, where it's maybe having good impact or helpful impact, and where it's not having a good impact. So for instance, I know when I get excited, I speak really quickly, but actually what tends to happen is I stumble over my words then, or I don't actually take time to check that what I'm articulating the other person's understood, because I'm going so quickly. And I work with international teams, and I have to really catch myself sometimes in terms of not speaking too quickly and engaging and making sure that they have had time to process the information. I'm getting better at it, and apparently I haven't got too strong a northern accent, so that helps, whereas some of my colleagues have got quite strong accents. So if you're trying to listen in a foreign language and you've got a strong accent, that's a real challenge for some people. So let's really reflect and think about our style and how we're showing up from a speaking perspective. So the one then that I find definitely is more of a challenge is listening. So I am not a natural born listener, and I have had to over the years develop techniques to ensure that I am better at listening than I used to be. So one of the things we really need to think about when we're practicing active listening is, how do we sort of switch off our immediate response to, we heard a word or a sentence that was trigger for us, and we immediately want to jump into that conversation. We want to get involved. We want to ask 10 questions. We want to have our piece. And so we're already not listening because we're somewhere else in our brain thinking about what's going on for us, what we're going to say. How do we stop doing that and really focus on the message that's being communicated back to us? So it's not easy. I mean, so my personal technique for doing listening is, if I know that I've got to like really engage in it, and maybe it's a subject that I think is quite dry, or maybe it's quite data driven, and so I'm struggling to keep connected to it, my technique for listening is to make lots of notes. So I tend to write more, and in writing it down, I don't know, something happens, it connects into me better, and I am much more likely to recall it. And I guess importantly, if it's facts and data, particularly for me, it means I can go back as well. So I can go back to those notes. So even if maybe it hasn't quite stuck and I haven't remembered, being able to make those notes and go back to them can be really, really useful. But I definitely find writing things down helps me with my ability to listen. So I would say listening, very important. Active listening is very important, which I guess brings us on to some of the non-verbal communication styles. So for instance, body language and listening connected together can be really important. So have you ever found yourself in a situation where you've maybe asked somebody if they're okay, and they've said they're fine? So, verbally, they've said everything's all right, but their body language is telling you some completely different. I mean, you think, I just got a feeling that that wasn't the case. I got a feeling that maybe their shoulders were down, or their head was down, or their arms were crossed and their body language was very closed, or there was something going on that said the signals I was getting verbally and the body language weren't matching, they weren't working together. So definitely following body language. And again, people with a stronger extrovert preference do quite often have a preference for using body language. It's being demonstrative as part of their communication style. So you'll see people who do use their hands a lot more versus maybe people who quite happy to sit with their hands in the lap and not use much body language in terms of their communication, which it isn't true for all introverts, but a lot of introverts won't use as much body language in terms of how they communicate. So again, interesting to watch, interesting to observe, to see whether either of those statements relate to you. As I say, it's not for everybody, but they're useful signals in terms of understanding a bit more about people. So we've got those non-verbal types of communication. And as a manager, the non-verbals can be really, really important. So if you haven't spoken to your team maybe that day or that morning in the office, being able to pick up the signs of body language can be really important. And I know in hybrid working, not having that connection, that could be quite difficult in terms of being able to collect additional information. So, you're on Zoom. How are you? Yeah, I'm fine. How are you? Yeah, I'm fine too. And yet we're not fine. We know there might be something going on, but our body language, it's hard to read on screen, definitely. So we've got to get better, I guess, at asking those questions. So then we've got those non-verbal communication signs. Then the other thing that we can look at from a communication point of view, and we don't always think a huge amount about this, is written communication. And this is a great one for getting to know more about your team and how your team work and what their communication preferences are. So if you take a moment to maybe pick a couple of different people within your team and go and read one or two of their emails, and really consider what they're telling you in their emails. So not the message itself, but in the structure and the way they communicate. So for instance, do you prefer to send an email rather than having a conversation with somebody? Do you tend to prefer to do very short forms of communication? So, yes or no. You prefer to use something like WhatsApp or Messenger or text rather than email, so that you don't have to do long conversations. They're very short, quick conversations. Do you like to write a long email that you can edit and go back to, so that you can form your thoughts, you can form and sort of structure the information that you want to share? Maybe there's attachments to it as well, spreadsheets or evidence. So you can start to think about the style of communication. Do you do things? So this is something I used to do, and I have had to teach myself to soften my communication. So I can be very task focused. And it means that sometimes if someone sends me a question on an email, or I want to send something to somebody else, I can get straight to the task. So just send the information or just ask the question. Not everyone likes that. Some people do like you to say hello before you start an email asking someone to do something for you. So what I do now is I've found that I write the content of the email in terms of the bit that's the focus for me, but then I will always go back and top and tail the email. So, I'll just take enough time to say hello to the person. I might ask about their weekend or ask how they're doing or just ask something and so it's just styled a bit more personally. It means I've taken the time to think about them as a person. Um, or I might sign it off differently, so a bit more friendly, or there might be some personal notes in the bottom of my email. Again, and I do that with the people who I know that's useful to, but I have had to soften my style because I was getting feedback that my emails came across a bit blunt or a bit hard sometimes. So again, we can think about how we structure our emails. And again, that gives us information then in terms of the language we're using. And the style of the email. So as a manager, why do we need to do this? Why can we not just show up exactly the way we are? And it isn't necessarily about changing the way we show up, but it's about understanding how our communication style has an impact on other people. So if I give you an example of what I mean, so as I say, I have had a very blunt style of communication, and I worked really hard to soften that because actually I was getting feedback that wasn't working for members of my team. But what you might find is if you are communicating in a particular way, so for instance, say you are rolling out your company strategy for the next 12 months. We're heading into the back end of the year. You might be thinking about future strategy for the next couple of years. So you're deciding to do some communication and you decide that you will communicate your strategy verbally. So you'll get everyone in a room or on a Zoom call and you'll do it verbally. So there's no presentation. You just talk through, this is what I think the next 2 years is going to look like. And that might be the language I use. But if you're running a team that's maybe full of people who like data and systems and order and structure, maybe you've got a team with lots of people who have engineering backgrounds or systems backgrounds or process backgrounds, and they like something that's more detailed, what you find is then the team might not engage with that communication. They'll listen to it, they'll take some of it in, but actually they might then have lots and lots of questions. So what does that mean for me? Can you tell me the detail behind that? What are the key milestones for that strategy? How are we going to make it happen? What's the roadmap for it? So they're giving you signals that actually you might be working at this level, doing something very visual, and they're looking for something very objective with milestones, markers, data, information. So you probably still get the strategy across in terms of the key message, but will people feel bought in and engaged and then be performing against that strategy and delivering against that strategy? Or actually, if you were to have that conversation again and then maybe put it in writing or put a project plan together or do something that just engages slightly stronger with their communication style, you're likely to have much better levels of engagement, but also you'll see then the performance is connected better to those objectives as well because they work better, they translate better to those people. So definitely being able to flex your communication style to engage with your team, for your team to then perform better, is really, really important in terms of then thinking about your style of communication. So it's all well and good talking about it, but sometimes you need to put these things in action. And so in the Evolve Manager, we do an activity where we ask you to think about the preferences of your team and observe them. So if you've got any sort of psychometrics in your business, now is a brilliant time to dust them off. So for instance, we work a lot with insights discovery, and in insights discovery, there is a communications preferences section of insights. And I know quite a lot of the other psychometrics have some information about communication preferences. So as I say, if you've got a profile, go and dust it off. You suddenly might find it's become useful again to you. Go back and look at what your style is. If your team have got psychometrics, get them to get theirs out, maybe have a conversation about them. But if you haven't got psychometrics, what do you do? So I would start by having a look at your team, observe your team. And the really easy way to do this is just to get a piece of paper, draw a table on it, write everyone's name in, and then just start writing notes about what you've observed about things like, so these are some of the headings you could use. Their email style. So how detailed are they? How much structure's in them? Or how short are they? So you can then think about, well, they're telling you how they like to write emails. So for instance, if your general email that you receive from a member of the team is 2 or 3 lines long, and you send big paragraphs of data with attachments on it, you might find they're not reading them, then they're finding them difficult, they're struggling to engage with them because their style of communication that they like is different. So have a look at their email style. Have a look at how much that individual chats. So how much time do they spend connecting in with other people? Because that is a great way of understanding sort of that extrovert introvert preference. In terms of who they connect into, how much time they spend maybe building a social relationship versus a work relationship. So are they building networks, building conversations that way? The amount of detail that person looks for or needs in terms of how they communicate and how they respond to your communication. So that's a really good one. Body language, again, really good one. Look at how much somebody uses body language or not to communicate. How much thinking out loud is going on. So that I used to work with a lady who used to talk to her computer a lot. So she'd be talking out loud, wording her emails, thinking about what she was doing next. It's really funny. We just learned to let it sort of go. Occasionally she'd say, I'm actually talking to one of the team. And we're like, oh, right, we just assumed you were doing, your style of work. Have a look at who pauses to listen. Have a look at who's like quietly observing rather than maybe communicating verbally all the time, and see what's going on with those people. So are you creating space in your meetings for the people who are more reflective to listen and then raise points and then ask questions? And again, who asks lots of questions? Who's asking for more data and more detail and more clarification? Because that's giving you a signal. Maybe you aren't giving people as much detail as they might need. So then what you can do is, once you've sort of pulled this picture together, is you can either verify it with your team if you want to. So say, these are the things I've seen. Does this feel right for you? And if you don't want to do that, then obviously you can still think about the impact you're having on your team. So one of the things you can do is you can then start to think about how you adapt and connect your own style. So that would be like the second part of the activity. So profile your team to start with, just watch them and observe them, understand what's going on for them. And then the second thing to do would be to think about, how do you adapt and connect better to those people? So again, you might just write yourself a little action down the right-hand side of your piece of paper that says, what would I do differently that might bring a different result for that team member, that might help them and support them? So for instance, if you've got somebody asking you, every time you set a task, you've got somebody asking lots and lots of questions, reflect back on, are you giving them enough data? Are you giving them enough direction? What's going on for them that they have to ask all those questions? And then 2, think about the next time you give somebody a piece of work, that same person, do you give them a piece of work in a slightly different way? Do you follow it up with an email, for instance, to see if that works better for them? And again, as I say, you can have that conversation, you can test that principle with them, and it is useful to test it because then you can get feedback rather than sort of trying and then thinking you've maybe gone a little bit bonkers because all of a sudden you're doing things that feel very out of character. But that's a really nice, really simple way of thinking about how you can adapt and connect, and how that then can impact on the performance of your team. You can also do things like, once you've done those observations, think about how effective your regular team meetings are or your regular one-to-ones are with your team. And if there's things then that, again, you might want to adapt in terms of the way you run your meetings to get the best out of people. So is there space for people to prepare beforehand? Is there time for people to consider their decisions? So are you really catering for the introverts in the team as well as the extroverts? Is it always the same people that speak in the team? Okay, so if it is, what is it about those people that are leading the conversation, and is that helpful or unhelpful? So it's not necessarily that there's things that are not going well or things that are broken or bad, but it's thinking about things that say, if I made some tweaks to what I'm doing, I might get significantly better results. And as I say, if you do have a psychometric, by all means get them out and use them, because it's a play on words and I apologize, but they are very insightful. They give you lots of information, and that can be really helpful in terms of them thinking about how you adapt your style. So I'm hoping that that was helpful for you. If you would like either to talk to me about insights profiles, if you would like to talk to me more about communication styles, please drop me a message, penny@pennyjoneshr.com. If you think this has been useful, as I say, there's lots of other resources there, so please feel free to use those resources too. And have a great week. See you soon.